Hello, good evening and welcome. And I think once again, we might be doing it again. You see, our fathers before us taught it wise, that to run a nation, you needed certain institutions, certain systems that makes a nation work. So once upon a time, we had the Black Star Line. Once upon a time, we had Ghana Airways. What did we do? Somehow sold it. We always have a reason to say it is not working anymore, let's sell it. You see, they came up with the agricultural bank because they knew there were people who were going to go into agribusiness and they might need some financial assistance. So why not? Let's give them a bank. They knew people would want to do investment, so there was the National Investment Bank. There were people who would be interested in commerce. Therefore, they set up a commercial bank. So all these things were thought. Now, some few days ago, indigenous equity firm Fortis Equity Private Fund Limited paid some 90 million Ghana cedis to acquire a majority stake in Merchant Bank Ghana Limited. The Social Security and National Insurance Trust, SSNIT, in July abrogated First Rand's takeover of Merchant Bank after the two parties failed to reach an agreement on the commercial principles for the acquisition. Question is, have been raised about the sale of the Merchant Bank. Was the process transparent? Is the amount paid the real value, the stake acquired amongst others? Today on PM Express, that's exactly what we're going to find out. That transparency, that everything is above board and nothing is shrouded in secrecy. When I come back from the break, I will introduce my two gallant men who are going to discuss this issue. My name is Nana Ansakwa, and this is PM Express. Hello and welcome back. The sale of Merchant Bank. You see, the selling of national asset is not necessarily a bad thing, or anybody is particularly against it. Sometimes the procedure or how it is sold become a bit questionable. Again, if it becomes a culture where once upon a time all these systems used to run and it works in other countries and you don't seem to make it work, it's a sad story. But what particularly makes me sad is you have the thing, you run it down, and then some foreigner comes, buys exactly the same thing, the same building, takes half of the workers away and works with just half the staff, and then all of a sudden they're making money. You should now go and ask yourself, what are we doing wrong? So today the question on the table is Merchant Bank for sale. What are the procedures and is everything above board? With me to discuss this issue, from my extreme left is Percival Ampoma. I think he likes to be called Percy. Percy Ampoma. He's head of investment venture capital trust fund. And to my immediate left, my senior brother, Andrew Awuni, executive director, Center for Freedom and Accuracy. And indeed, it is his paper, The Scandal, that broke this story. And I think he has further questions to answer on this issue. And gentlemen, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Andrew, Rand is a foreign company. Fortis seems to be a local company. So first instinct is, of course, sell it to a local company. Why should, a fellow Ghanaian jump up and down and say, no, don't sell it to Fortis?
Well, first of all, let me just correct that Scandal is not my paper. I work with the Center for Freedom and Accuracy.
Okay.
And the Center for Freedom and Accuracy are publishers of the Scandal. Scandal is a completely separate entity
from Freeman.
And we hardly have anything to do with them except when we have some specific things we want to discuss with the editor and his staff.
Noted. Noted.
Again, another clarification has nothing to do with foreigner or indigenous. We have no interest in who really buys a state asset. I don't know First Rand, never met them. I don't know any official from First Rand, and I don't work for First Rand. So this thing is not about talking for First Rand or anybody for that matter. What this whole thing is about is looking at the procedures, looking at the proposals that were presented by all those who showed interest in buying Merchant Bank, and also examining the Bank of Ghana's own press release and following up to find out who are these people who have finally made it by way of a takeover of Merchant Bank. You will recall that the sale of Merchant Bank has been on the table for a very long time, over a year now. In fact, there was a time when we thought that a deal had been reached. And then from the presidency, the president had to give a fiat, issue a fiat saying Merchant Bank will not be sold again. But we have gone 360 degrees and we have come to this point where now we are told that a new entity has succeeded and that they have reached agreement with the majority shareholders of Merchant Bank. So really what this whole thing is about is examining the proposals and looking out for the interests of the public, looking out for the interests of Ghana. Are we getting value for money? What is really reading in between the lines and trying to find out what exactly our leaders are trying to do. And then we realize that no, this certainly doesn't smell good. Like some people put it, it stinks. That is exactly what it is. Indeed, Nana, if you should look at the facts, I'm surprised that grown-up people, in fact, learned people, leaders, can actually throw the facts as they exist to their own people and still be able to look them in the face and say, we are taking this thing away. I can't believe it, but it is happening. And that is the pain some of us carry.
Andy, let's then break it down and find out what First Rand initially offered the bank on their table, and then we compare the two, and then we have an investment banker here. You could probably give us reasons why we should accept the lower bid and not the higher bid.
Okay. You see, first of all, it will be important to even look at the Bank of Ghana's own press statement. On the 1st of November, Mr. Andrew Boydo, the Secretary of the Bank of Ghana, issued a press release. He said, titled Acquisition of Merchant Bank Ghana Limited by Fortis Private Equity Fund. In that press release, he says Fortis Private Equity Fund, a wholly owned Ghanaian equity fund, has reached agreement with the Social Security and National Insurance Trust and SIC Life to take over the majority shares in Merchant Bank Ghana Limited. Now, that is not even true, because as I speak, as we sit here, the shareholders' agreement has not been signed. That's number one. Then he continues to say, under the terms of the agreement, the acquisition includes non-performing loans in Merban Assets Recovery Trust. Now, that is a very hanging statement. It includes. What he did not tell us is that Fortis has offered to only carry 30% of those non-performing loans. That should not make Mr. Boy say this, that the acquisition, the terms of the agreement of the acquisition includes the carrying, the taking over of non-performing loans, when he knows, before he put his pen to paper, he knew exactly that these guys had decided to take only 30%, and yet he put this out there, refusing to mention any figures. He goes on to say, Fortis Private Equity Fund will inject adequate capital. Nobody does that. What is adequate? In this business world, what we deal with is facts and figures. Somebody walks in, he says, I'm going to buy this house. He says, I will renovate it. And you say, how much are you going to invest in renovating this building? He says, adequate funds. What will that mean to you?
Could adequate in the banking mean that because as per their laws you need a certain minimum amount to take over? Could that be what the adequate is?
So if it is about the requirements, the minimum requirements, which for rural banks we have a certain minimum requirement, for commercial banks or universal banks we have certain minimum requirements. We knew of 60 million after 2009. As we speak now, from August this year, they increased it to 120. So if it is 60 million, say they will invest 60 million. If it is 120 million, say they will invest 120 million. This is a banker talking. This is not a pedestrian. And he says they will give what? Adequate capital to address the solvency and liquidity challenges facing the bank.
I'm going to take a break, but before I do, let me bring Percy in here because this is bank letters or bank writing. So, I mean, if I say they're going to bring in adequate funds, should we go to sleep knowing that by all means they will bring what we perceive as adequate funds?
Well, first of all, I should say good evening to your viewers, and it's interesting to digest this sale. I have to also first admit that I would speak from the private equity angle because I always admit that I don't know the very details of this transaction very well to be able to make a very good opinion on this. So I may be talking more on the private equity transaction. Will they be able to provide adequate capital? One of the things that may have attracted the shareholders and of course the board or the people who actually approved this is the firepower that Fortis is coming in. When I say firepower, I mean the money that they are coming with. In typical private equity transaction, the fund that is buying the company must have enough capital to build value in the company, which is a consideration that would be placed on the table. Do you have the money coming to you? A fund that is structured as a typical private equity fund would have shareholders' capital ready to be put in a fund like that. So if that is available from Fortis' point of view, then of course they should be able to put that 60 million there. One thing of note is also some of these details in a typical private equity transactions, some of these details are not made clear. So they might use quite ambiguous language like they would put adequate capital. They will not state that they are going to put 120 million or they are going to put 220 million. It might be quite vague for us. Until we know the details of the transaction, we will never know. But a typical private equity transaction fund should be able to provide that kind of funding for us. Okay, I'm going to take a break here, and then when we come back, we now look at the figures and see what adequate means for both companies. So we'll stay tuned. Limited, and again, let me do a quick introduction. I have Percy Ampoma from my extreme left, head of investment venture capital trust fund, and then my immediate left, Andrew Owoni, executive director, Center for Freedom and Accuracy. And now we're going to look at what the two companies proposed and how come one seems to have accepted and the other one not, even though the Bank of Ghana seemed to have accepted it because they've written a letter to that effect, even though the contract is signed or not. It goes to say that they will sign it eventually.
Well, you see, Nana, I'm not too comfortable about making this sound like we're making a comparison between RAND and Fortis.
But then we have to, because
yeah, we may make reference to some of these things, but really the issue is about Fortis and the proposal that has been put on table for the acquisition of Merchant Bank.
But Andrew, if we don't compare it to anything, then it doesn't make it look good or look bad. If we present Fortis' figures and we don't say, oh, maybe this guy offered this and that guy offered this, then Fortis' offer does not look...
Apart from the offers that we are looking at, we are also looking at the profiling of the companies. Now, let me explain something to you. The government's divestiture program has been an ongoing program. It is a detailed government policy that has been running since 1985. The policy has certain underpinnings. When government says that these state assets or these state enterprises or parastatals have certain challenges and need help, there are three main areas that we look out for. And I speak as one who has worked with the Diversity Implementation Committee before as a consultant. We look out for three main areas. We talk about strategic investors. So that, for instance, if you have a radio station and the radio station is having challenges, I could come to Joy FM and seek partnership, strategic partnership. I could even sell out to Joy FM because I want to affiliate, I want to associate with Joy, benefit from Joy FM or multimedia's expertise, your network, your connections, so I can also grow in the process. It's called strategic partnership. That's one thing that we always look out for in divestitures of state enterprises. The second thing we look out for is the capacity of this investor to inject capital. So he may not be a strategic investor. He may just as well be an importer and exporter or a trader. But he has adequate capital to bring into the institution. We call it injection of capital, to give the institution a new lease of life. So the things you could not do, now you have sufficient funds. It solves the solvency problems that you may have. That's another criteria for divestiture. The third criteria for divestiture is that in some state enterprises, we have challenges with management. So for instance, you can bring a manager to manage a state hotel, because then you benefit from management services. The government's divestiture program is not running in a vacuum. So it is not just about proposals. It is also about the profiling of the person who is coming to buy. That's very important, even before you begin to talk about. Are you saying that some 7 Malians get together, cola sellers from Mali get together, bring money here, they can buy? What is the objective for the sale in the first place? What is it that you are trying to get merchant bank out of? How does this investor coming in help to solve the problem? Is he a strategic investor who will help, like the radio station example I gave? Or is he coming here with capital? So if you limit it to just who offered what, you may be making a mistake. It is important to look at the figures as well. And that is why we particularly have some difficulties with Fortis. Because when you look at the profiling of Fortis, he's from the venture capital, so he understands this better. But this is a company, and again, please educate us. This is a company, as we understand it, registered only in June of this year. This is a company, as we understand it again, has no record of transaction anywhere. This is a company, as we understand, is doing its first transaction by this bid. This is a company that has a stated capital, he was just trying to explain to me, of 5 million Ghana cedis. I explained to certain people, for example, that the Bank of Ghana in 2009 began a certain realignment, changes in the banking system, where it raised stated capitals of all these banks to 60 million. There was hue and cry. In fact, people said that the rush of Nigerian banks was as a result of that policy. Only last August, the deputy governor at the 23rd annual general meeting announced a further increase. That's 120 million for any new entrant, universal banking, I mean. That's a new entrant. You are talking about a group that is buying over a bank. Should they have 120 million as their stated capital to fulfill the requirement of the Bank of Ghana, or it doesn't matter at all? You see, there are several questions. And again, people talk about how perhaps the difference could be in the treatment of the bad debts that are on the books of the bank, of merchant bank. Before now, the calculation was that they had about 240 million Ghana cedis as bad debt. The restructuring was done and it was brought down to 175 billion Ghana cedis. We have seen Sabri advisors, their proposal, and we know what Sabri advisors really said they wanted to do. We have seen Fidelity Bank. We have seen UT. We have seen RAND. And of course, we have seen Fortis. Bank of Ghana says Fortis is going to take care of the non-performing assets, whereas they are holding a proposal that says that they will only recover 30% of those debts and pass on the 70% to Senate. That's you and I.
Andy, even though they've declared that they have 5 million, I mean, could they have a grandfather somewhere who's got the extra, 55 million that they can take from, or 125 million that they can take from? Is he allowed? I mean, let me...
Well, yeah, thank you. First off, I think I would like to agree with Andy on a few points that he made at the beginning of that. The three things that they look out for in the divestiture sounds very much like the way private equity transactions are really done. That the first of you profile who is coming to buy. It's a strategic buyer. A strategic buyer is not just the person who is bringing the money, but is also bringing some value to the business post-acquisition, which is very important here. And if we are to compare the differences in Fortis and Rand, one of the reasons why the decision makers would choose one over the other might be post-acquisition value that these bidders are bringing on board. And so that could serve as a decision point for them. And again, you talked about post-acquisition management. Again, what are you going to do with the company when you buy? So I like to agree that in private equity terms is very, very true. Now, a private equity fund, like you were saying, do they even have some money somewhere? I don't know the fund structure of Fortis. I don't know, it is not stated the fund size. Usually a private equity fund would have a fund size. So it will say $120 million private equity fund has purchased this, all right? Or it will say this fund that is operating has purchased this, and we know the fund is a $10 million fund. I don't know the fund size of Fortis, but in order for Fortis to be able to absorb or put more money into merchant bank post-acquisition to get to the level that is required by Bank of Ghana's solvency, it must have a shareholders agreement or some fund available to cover that. It doesn't necessarily have to reflect in the stated capital. And I'll give you an example. Our venture capital funds are structured with something called committed capital. A committed capital is a capital that is committed by the shareholders in the fund. And once it is committed, when it's necessary for the fund manager who's managing the fund to call for this capital, he calls on the shareholders and the shareholders bring the money. And if this fund is a private equity fund, it operates in the same way. It has committed capital from shareholders, and these shareholders will be called upon to bring the money as and when it is ready or it is necessary for them to do that. So they might establish a shell company, and I think I'd like to believe that Fortis fund, equity fund, is probably a shell company. I'm not too sure, but it's probably a shell company that is just established to hold this kind of investment, which means that it would have shareholders who would have committed some level of capital to pump into merchant bank post-acquisition. So I mean, like I said, I don't know much about what Fortis has, but this should be the understanding if Fortis is going to be able to provide the funding for merchant bank.
Let me see if I get this shell company, because that's what I was going to ask, was that, I mean, even though it's just been registered, could it be a big company I just taking a little, let's just register this to go and buy a merchant bank, and that they come under a big umbrella?
Absolutely. It could be that they just structured this. Also, they could have structured it as a special purpose vehicle, right? They could just structure this to just hold the shares of merchant bank and structure it that way. So again, it could have happened that way. It could have also been that it's a new fund, but the people behind the fund necessarily, if you look on the fund, you might not, usually if you're doing an analysis of a fund, you usually go beyond the fund's name and look at the people behind the fund. So when we talk about the track record of the fund, it's going beyond the fund's name, because that fund might not necessarily have any investments or track record. It's just starting. But what's important for us to know, what we should learn, is who is behind Fortis and what's the track record of the managers who are managing this private equity fund that is coming through to them.
I think
okay, I think he's got that. Fantastic. Okay, so we have some investors here, or the managers, or the people. We need to profile these people to find out whether they have the requisite skills to manage this. And if they don't, a private equity fund can still bring on board the necessary expertise to do these things. And these are some of the things we need to know. Like I said, a lot of these things are not made clear to us. So I really don't know much about this, but I can tell you from my perspective, a private equity operates that way, which is why it sounds a bit opaque to us, but that's how the transaction is.
I'll put the same question to Andy, that, you know, could they have just broken away and using their new, you know, breakaway status to purchase it? And in that case, when you are doing the profiling, as you're a member of the divestiture, do you go beyond this new company that has been registered, or do you go and look at the umbrella company and then give them the credit for that?
Well, again, there is quite sufficient information in whatever documentation has been presented for this purchase. And let us quickly dismiss the impression that there are some godfathers somewhere who may be behind this and they are money bags, so yes, they can buy it, and you don't necessarily have to look at their figures, but somebody can come from behind and push some money to cushion them, all that. We have the names of the shareholders. There are only 3 shareholders here. In fact, 2 names look like the same people, like a couple. And the third one is actually not a Ghanaian, but a Togolese. And we have the shareholding structure here. So we know the people who are behind it. They are not hidden. We know the directors. They are here. They are not hidden. So let us quickly, and for viewers, please, don't buy that at all, that some money may be sitting somewhere that is going to come in here. We are looking at the face. Somebody said the face of the pig sheet. This is not a pig sheet. We are looking at the face of the document.
My director wants to see the sheet that has got names on it, so I can show it to you.
No. So this is what we are talking about. We've got it here. And so, really, we are not talking about any mysteries. We are talking about a company. And I admit that I may not have very in-depth understanding of venture capital or equity fund. I qualified as a broker as far back as 1992. So I'm not also just talking as a layman. For those people who go about saying he doesn't know what he's talking about, let them go check. I'm a certified and qualified broker since 1992. So I understand these things as well. So I'm saying that what we are dealing with is not a mystery. The figures are there, the names are there, the profile is there. But one thing that is missing in all this is that nobody really has told us exactly why Senate is selling off its shares in Merchant Bank. Nobody. Nobody has told us.
Is it because the losses? I mean, there's no losses in the bank.
Well, if it is that bad, some people are investing in it now. You see, look at this analogy, which I have used quite a few times. If your grandfather left with a piece of land, it is seen as a property you must hold and cherish. If you wake up one day and you say you want to sell that piece of land, you must have a good reason to sell that piece of land. For instance, if my mother was going to the hospital and needed a surgery, and I needed big money to take care of the surgery, I will have a very good reason to sell that piece of land. If my brother was being carried to Nsawam jail because of some crime he has committed, and there was a fine to pay, I think I will have a good reason to sell that piece of land. Throughout this country, and for all contributors of Senate, nobody has told us exactly what the problem is with Senate that they want to offload those shares. Nobody. Nobody has told us. And that is very, very important. You see, Senate does not grow money. Senate takes your money, and all these young ladies and young men who are standing here on the floor, carrying cameras and sounds and doing all the work here, their money is there. They're holding that money in trust for us. And Merchant Bank is an asset. Some of them came and met Merchant Bank. We must be told. Nobody tells us. It's like we are packaging this asset and handing it over to some group of people. Period. And we're saying that even if you were going to do so, let us get value for money. Let's put aside whatever it is. In any case, listen to this. Fortis is taking 90%, wants to take 90% of Merchant Bank. and leave Senate with 8% and SIC Life with 2%. That's the Ghanaian you are talking about. Rand's Bank wants to take 75% and is willing to pay 199.3% a million for that and still leave 25 between Senate and SIC. So really, and when you look at, I mean, we earlier on talked about the profiling. When you look at the profiling, who really brings value? You talk about post-acquisition and what the people intend to bring. I read somewhere in the press statement that Fortis intends to carry, to organize to take merchant bank, list merchant bank on the Ghana Stock Exchange. And it's laughable. It's very laughable. The fund is only 5 months old. Can I tell you something, Nana? Merchant Bank is a founding member of Ghana Stock Exchange. Merchant Bank provided Ghana Stock Exchange their very first managing director. Merchant Bank has the oldest brokers, one of the oldest brokerage firms sitting at that headquarters there. Who should take who to the stock market? Fortis to take Merchant Bank to Ghana Stock Exchange? Who will take who to the stock exchange? Now, sometimes, and that's why I opened this discussion by saying that it amazes me how we can put out these statements, these facts, in the face of the people we lead. And that's why sometimes we have problems with our politics, because you may use your muzzle, your political muzzle, to do whatever you want, but you don't stay there forever. When things turn around and people want to right the wrongs, then we come in with the issues of political witch hunting. May not be the case at all, but these are issues you should properly investigate. I think that this exercise we are carrying out now will benefit the President Mahama, very much, because it must let him understand that people of this country will support him if he stood his ground on what he earlier on told Ghanaians about Merchant Bank. He doesn't have to back up. He doesn't have to give it up. If indeed he thinks that this bank must go, he has the responsibility to explain to us, countrymen, this is what I said last year, but now I think we have a better deal, so let us move on with it.
Let me bring Percy in here. Percy, all the time we're talking about the bank's debt and buy the debt and bank debt and back debt. I mean, I don't know how the banking system works, but is the debt becoming, it's almost the same value as the bank now, isn't it? Oh?
Yeah, well, 175 million, that's what they're saying.
And if people are offering to pay about 190 for the bank, then it means the debt is as equal as the bank.
Yeah, well, you could say that, yeah.
So then it means that the bank is not sort of...
You see, the debts that we are talking about here is more of or less an asset, not necessarily a debt per se that the bank owes, because this is an asset that the bank holds. Okay. It's a debt that people, it's an obligation to pay the bank. But, okay. People have borrowed money from the bank, and they hold it on their book as assets. So that is what they hold, and that's the value that they've quoted there. The problem here is, what is the quality of that debt sitting on that book? I think one of the key things that might inform some of the comparisons we're making, what is the quality of that debt? And no two of us can actually come to the same conclusion. I mean, evaluation, we hardly ever do. So one might come to the conclusion that, well, the market value of this debt, looking at the recoverability opportunities that I have, it might be less than the amount that is quoted on the books.
Okay.
So maybe the two bidders who are bidding might not come to the same conclusion on the value of the debt sitting in the book. That might lead to a different valuation on both sides. One might say, okay, I know this debt, we can only recover maybe 60, 70%. And because of that, I am going to discount it to that level and then put it on the books and add it to the value. One will say, no, well, I believe we can recover much more than that. And when that comes, when we get to the valuation, it will be completely different valuations. It could be one of the reasons why we are seeing this deviation, because I can see if you check the full valuation of Rand against the full valuation of Fortis, Fortis has done a very low valuation of the bank. What is not very clear is during the valuation whether it was included, whether the debt portion is included in that valuation.
As an asset.
As an asset included in the valuation. It's
Or
not very
liability.
clear. It should be an asset, of course.
But
It's
some
sitting
part
on
of
the
it will
book.
be a liability. A percentage of that loan will be a liability.
No.
Because if you cannot recover 50%, then that becomes your asset. Then the other 50 then is a liability.
It's written off. It doesn't become a value to you.
Okay.
All right? It's written off because it's 50%. You see, you're establishing the market value of that debt and add it to the value of the company, together with all the other things that merchant bank comes with, the brand and the non-tangible, intangible assets and the tangible assets, everything that it comes with to establish an equity value. All right, it's an asset. So when you write some off, it doesn't become a value to you.
Okay.
And two people can come to a different conclusion on the debt.
I can explain this. You see, you are right when Percy says that the variation in the values, and here we're talking rand and 40s of the same asset, merchant bank. You are right when you say it may be as a result of how each one of them treated the bad and doubtful debts that are on the books.
Let me take a break here so that you take your time and explain that for me. I'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, we find out exactly how much of this debt was being written off and how much wasn't. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back, and we're discussing the sale of Merchant Bank. Two things that really I find intriguing is why is SSNIT offloading the shares? And that's what Andrew has, and it keeps ringing back, you know, if you're going to sell your shares in something, two reasons. One, you're losing money, or you've seen a bigger opportunity somewhere, so let me offload this and build a bigger hotel in Cape Coast, it will make me more money. Why are they selling it? Because indeed they are just a trust. The money is just for you and I. And I want a big explanation as to if the bank is making money or not, because we keep talking about this debt business. Normally we speak English here, but today it's getting a bit technical, but you know, excuse me, we'll get there in the end. And you try to explain to us as to if the bank has got a debt of about 173 million, you know, so is it still classified as a profitable bank? Are these monies that, you know, will be recovered, or are these bad debts?
Well, you see, normally when the bank calculates its assets, it takes all these things into consideration. You have borrowed my money. I lend you money. So when I'm calculating how much I have, I add what I have given to you, even though physically I don't have it.
Sure.
Now, if you lose your job, it becomes more difficult for you to pay back. So then the probability of you paying reduces. That is when we begin to talk about bad and doubtful debts. It gets to a point when you have lost your home and you are destitute. It gets to a point where I see Nana can't pay anymore. Then I have to strike it out from my assets and stop counting it as part of my wealth. Then when I take it off, then it means that what I used to, my value will do what? Will drop. That's what it is all about. We are saying that Merchant Bank has a huge bad and doubtful debt. What is important, Percy, is that those who owe have not filed for bankruptcy. These are, let me say that again, those who owe, those who are on the books, haven't filed for bankruptcy. These are visible, identifiable. They are even venturing into new businesses, and people know about them. All right?
Which means the debt's very recoverable.
Which means the debt is very recoverable. These are businesses that have gone into new territories, that have acquired new assets, and have been made public. You were talking about, I earlier on talked about why Senate wants to offload. It can't be that Senate is having hard times. Senate has just started an airline. You know about that? Africa World.
I didn't know Senate was behind
airline. Senate is behind it. That is not a poor institution that wants to sell off its property to keep limbs and feet together. They are moving on. They are doing new things. We are told that there's an arrangement for them to enter to construct buildings as part of the government's program. So Senate is not in a difficulty. Somebody wants to get merchant bank, or some people want to get merchant bank. They will take it from Ghanaians whether you like it or not. That's my conclusion. I may be completely wrong, but let them prove me wrong. You see, otherwise, we do not go the way we are going. In fact, there is a certain level of impunity in all that we are seeing. Let them talk. Let them say it. We will go ahead anyway. We're saying that...
Why would the central bank issue that letter? Assuming that because the deal is done and...
I told you earlier on, for example, that I find that very difficult to understand because these are very honorable people. I know, for example, that the sales and purchase agreement is being looked at all over again because certain things have been identified. And that is being looked at all over again. The shareholders agreement hasn't even been touched. So what is it that the Bank of Ghana gave approval for? A takeover?
Because the transaction is still on the table.
Because the transaction is still on the table.
Intention? Notice of intention? I mean, I don't know. So I'm trying to find a good word for it.
No, I think they said that they have come to an agreement. I think that was what they said. Fortis Equity Holding has reached an agreement with the Social Security, an agreement with one shareholder. Sorry, an SICFSL, so with two shareholders. They have reached an agreement. I think that's what they said. And they disclosed a bit of the... Not much has been given.
Yes, but when you say an agreement, what is the agreement? To take over.
That's what they said.
Could it be well, I mean, word of mouth agreement that, well, if you know, if you go through these and these things, you know, I'm happy to give it to you. I don't know.
No, this is what I admitted at the beginning.
Reverse transaction? Can you explain that? You see,
you know, I'm selling my house, and I'm saying that, look, I'm selling it for 60 million. He says, okay, I'll do that. Okay, then shake my hands. Once you give me the 60 million, it's sold.
Yes, there are usually a few documentation, maybe letter of intent or something that comes, or maybe some terms or term sheet or something that comes, you know, at that level to establish some basic mechanisms of the transaction that will come. So to get to this point, I'm assuming that some papers have changed hands. See, like I admitted at the beginning, this doesn't tell you much about the level. It says that they have reached an agreement. Whether it is signed, it's not signed, we don't know. Whether it was a verbal agreement or it's just a term sheet that has been given, we don't really know. Whether the transaction as it is presented right now would be the final transaction or whether it is still on the table. I think you have admitted that it's actually still on the table from what we are looking at.
See, but then this won't be a press release. This will be a letter that you give to the guy buying that, you know, as you know, as we discussed earlier, that sort of letter, as we discussed earlier. But if it comes out in the open, how then does it become as we discussed earlier?
Well, isn't one of the key things that well, one of the key things they are trying to do is to actually disclose some information about this transaction going on, right? If they had waited to say Fortis had actually closed the transaction and has actually agreed to invest so and so in Merchant Bank, buying so and so % of Merchant Bank at this price, right? And has agreed to invest an additional amount of this to recapitalize the bank. I mean, this kind of verbiage would be something that will come at a later time. So this information now, I am taking it that is giving a general information about what is actually going on this transaction.
Andy, have you spoken to anybody from Andy, the central bank?
Maybe. You see, I can tell you what I think the purpose of this letter is, and it is in the last paragraph. It says the Bank of Ghana has reviewed the agreement. What is an agreement?
The document.
Is it the one they are discussing? Is that the agreement? Agreement of the parties and granted
its approval.
Its approval. Let me tell you what that means, what that does. You see, it's what they call the reverse transaction. Look at it this way. My dad has entrusted some property to me and says, go ahead, look for buyers for it. And I'm at table discussing with buyers as to how much they should pay for this property. And then from the side, my dad announces, I've handed over, actually I've agreed with Percy to take over the property. My hands are tied. I'm sitting at that negotiating table. Percy has the asset already. That's the purpose of this letter.
What's the way forward, Andy?
Well, you see, sometimes we all just sit down, like I keep saying, look at all these young men. It's 10 p.m. Some of them are going as far as Amahia. They are going to Oyibi. They are going to Kaswa. Some are going to Wager. They have no vehicles of their own. They will walk down circle. They may get robbed. They may get mugged. They do this so at the end of the month they will take a salary from multimedia. Multimedia has an obligation to deduct some money from these meager salaries these young men and young ladies are taking from this place and hand it over to Senate. It is that money that Senate has invested in Merchant Bank. It is that money that some people want to take away from you. What's the way forward? What do these young people do? What can they do? Why should they leave it to one person? Why should they leave it to somebody to go about talking? And I want the people to be sincere and honest and look in the eyes of all these suffering people and do something about it. We don't have to go this length. We don't have to go in this direction at all. I think that the president needs help. I've said this several times. I think the president needs help. I think the president has to put his foot down. I think the president has to tell us why in this case he agrees, whereas in the past he did not agree. Maybe he will bring reason to it all. Then nerves can be calmed. But this is simply just taken with impunity, taking away an asset of the state and handing it over to some people just like that. Like we said, we talk about Fortis Equity Fund. What is the size of that Fortis Equity Fund? Every fund must have a size that is identifiable and known. That is what will make us know whether they have the capacity to buy a bank or not. What's the size of this fund that they are talking about? It can't just be a fund. What is the size of the fund? We see the three shareholders here, 51%, 29%, 20%. We see the stated capital. What is the size of the fund?
Well, gentlemen, not too soon, our time is up. But I think we posed all the questions out there, and hopefully, those who matter within the corridors of the sale of Merchant Bank would also put another press release out there explaining to us exactly what is going on. Thank you very much, Percy. Thank you, Andrew. And as I always say, tomorrow we'll be back to do it all over again.